Great. Well, first of all, I want to thank everyone for joining us for our webinar today. And this is part of National Insider Threat Awareness Month. September, as probably most of you know, but maybe not most everyone knows, September is National Insider Threat Awareness Month. We're really excited to help have an event as a part of celebrating that. And our discussion today is on modern insider threat programs, best practices and use cases. And our discussion is going to talk about some practical approaches to implementing insider threat programs and really be something hopefully that you can walk away with some lessons learned and things that you can apply back at your organization. And an ability just to learn more about insider threat, what it means, be able to dispel some of the myths out there. And in fact, in conjunction with today's program, we're going to be releasing a white paper on best practices and dispelling myths surrounding modern insider threat programs. So after today's webinar, all of you will receive a copy, an electronic copy of the paper that we'll send to you. And during our research on insider threat, we talked with a bunch of practitioners and policymakers within the Department of Defense, within the intelligence community, and within federal civilian agencies. And during these discussions, we learned, there's a lot of different opinions. There are some myths, there's some misunderstandings. There's a lot of kind of swirl around the idea of insider threat. And we want to, in the white paper and in today's discussion, really be able to unpack some of that and have it again as a resource for you as you're looking at your programs. And a lot of the confusion that we found especially is around insider threat programs on unclassified systems, whether they're in the Defense Department, inside the IC, and probably a little more so inside federal civilian agencies. So we'll dig into some of that today as well. So we have an excellent group of speakers for you today, and it gives me great pleasure. I want to start by introducing our keynote speaker, Mr. Robert Bob Rohr. Bob is the director for the National Insider Threat Task Force at the National Counterintelligence and Security Center. Bob's been working here in Washington, D.C. since 2003, when at the beginning, when DHS was first stood up and he came to Washington. He's joined the National Insider Threat Task Force in March of 2015. He brings a broad spectrum of experience in criminal and national security investigations, physical, electronic surveillance, and intelligence operations, counterintelligence, and counterterrorism. Quite frankly, Bob's done a little bit of everything in this space. We are really pleased and really fortunate to have him here to be our keynote speaker. So Bob, let me turn it over to you. But I guess one reminder before I do, for the audience members, both our keynote and our panelists will be taking questions from the floor. So there is a questions function. Please use that to submit questions, and we'll do our best to get all those that come in. So with that, let me turn it over to Bob. Bob, again, thank you very much for being with us.
Grant, thank you. My pleasure. It's funny, every time I hear my bio read, it either comes across as I've done everything or I can't keep a job. I haven't figured out which one that actually is. But thank you for being here, for the opportunity to be here, and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to this audience. I look forward to fielding questions. I always like to have a conversation more than a presentation, but so please feel free to throw out whatever questions you may have. So as Grant said, I'm the director of the National Insider Threat Task Force, which is a tremendous honor for me. I've been with this task force for some years now. When I came to the task force, we were about 3 years into our executive order, which stood up the national program. At the time, we were looking at a handful of programs that were really established. We're 10 years in. This month, next month actually, marks the 10-year anniversary of our founding executive order. And in that 10 years, we've seen 100 departments and agencies across the federal government build programs, the majority of which have met all minimum standards, and the majority of which are actually working towards maturing their programs to be more efficient, to be more effective, and to proactively counter the threat. I'm very proud to have been part of the evolution of this community. I see a lot of familiar names on the login list, and I want to thank everybody in this participation for their role in this important mission. So where are we going as a community? I think is probably the biggest challenge, the biggest issue we're looking at the National Insider Threat Task Force. We are, I think, postured now within the task force to step back from box checking compliance and get back to where we should be, and that is leading the nation at a strategic level, looking at the big issues, trying to tackle the big issues we're seeing. You touched on probably the first and foremost that we're looking at right now, and that is unclassified. So as you all are aware, there is no federal requirement for insider threat programs to cover the uncleared or the unclassified networks. But as you all know, one, that's where the vast majority of the federal crown jewels lay, is in the unclassified world. And two, we've also just stood up a national OPSEC program within NCSE. We've taken over the OPSEC mission space for the federal government, which, coupled with all the other missions we have within the National Counterintelligence Security Center, it makes it more important than ever for us to kind of take that OPSEC view, look at the crown jewels of the government, and say, well, if we're not protecting information that in aggregate compromises classified or national security information, national security operations, we're not even meeting really the spirit of the executive order that we were established under. So more to follow. We're looking at partnerships with NARA ISU and how can we advance the mission space to better protect our unclassified crown jewels. That said, I mean, there's no restriction from organizations doing so, and we fully believe that that it is, it is the way of the future. So that's the first and foremost challenge I think we have, is really expanding the national program to better protect against all threats. You've got some panels on the panel this afternoon that have much more on the ground experience in that world than I do, and I look forward to hearing their comments and suggestions on that as well. One of the other big challenges we see is the threats faced by the workforce, and I'm not going to say that the workforce threat is the threat faced by the workforce. Obviously, the big elephant in the room is COVID. We've all seen this environment change. We're working from home right now. If you told me 2 years ago or 2 years, that OD&I, NCSC, we would be spending half of our time working from a home computer, I would have laughed at you. But it's where we are. And obviously this creates challenges. As we were discussing before we came on, I'm an empty nester. This is just fine for me. But many of my colleagues trying to juggle children, trying to juggle homeschooling, isolation from their colleagues. There's so many challenges out there that we're facing because of COVID. There's many opportunities that we're facing. It's just a paradigm shift for us that we have to adapt to. One of the obvious other challenges the workforce is facing is just kind of the socio-political environment we're in these days, which, it's so much more contentious social environments out there. I know my colleagues here have been addressing issues with domestic violence, extremism, other challenges, but beyond the extremes, there's just the greater stress that we're all facing turning on the news. So economic instability, I think we're doing a little better now, but obviously there was, I know in the private sector, lots of challenges throughout. Am I going to keep my job? Do I need to be, looking after myself more than my organization? Those challenges are real, and we've seen, at least certainly on the private sector side or through a private sector engagement, that's a significant challenge. But I want to put on my NCSE hat here for a second and talk about probably the biggest challenge that we're seeing within the National Counterintelligence and Security Center. And that is, we always talk about the workforce behavior, the behavior inside our organizations. the behavior of our great power competitors is probably the most significant challenge that we are seeing today when it comes to protecting national resources, our economic security. I hope everybody's familiar with the National Counterintelligence Strategy that was put out several years ago, where we highlight the challenges we're seeing from Russia, People's Republic of China, Democratic People's Republic of Korea, Iran, non-state actors, these active great power competitors and or active non-state actors. They're attacking us with greater capability, broader set of targets. Fight is largely in the private sector these days. And it's important to describe, as we said, we talk about the human behaviors. Insider threat's a human problem. It's a human problem also because we're facing a human external threat that engineers and moves and uses a blended offensive capability and navigates from cyber to human operations back and forth freely. We're facing very complex practiced intelligence services or intelligence-like services with some of these non-state actors. There's a couple of factors that I think we will see in the next few years that are good and bad. I think we're really obviously cyber's the soup du jour. Cyber's getting the resources. We're making great strides. I like the concept of zero trust and the concept of protecting from an InfoSec perspective, protecting the information out. From an InfoSec perspective, I think that there is no greater partner that the insider threat community has than the cybersecurity side. But think of it this way: if you lock your information down, that's great. And if you're able to really restrict the ability of the adversary to move freely across your networks and exploit your networks from a technical perspective, essentially that will put the humans in your organization on the target deck more, not less. That coupled with the fact that we've had so many compromises of PII, we've had so many personally identifiable information, we've had so many compromises from on the government side, our security files to our health insurance to financial records, the big data from Amazon and some of these things that can be used to better target our workforce. You couple that with social media exploitation. Adversaries don't have to work very hard to target the human beings in our organization. And as I said, the more you lock down and better cyber hygiene you have, the more that's going to put the human on the target deck. So I think as we move forward, insider threat is going to become more of a challenge, not less of a challenge. I think you've all seen, we've all discussed, the remote access we're all doing now, working from home, coupled with the stresses of our workforce, coupled with an adversary that is real, that is active, that is orchestrated, that is human, that behaves with human intelligence, targeting us and our workforce. It's only going to be more exacerbated over the coming years. So, what can we do about that? I think first and foremost, the theme of this month's National Insider Threat Awareness Month, the workforce culture, I think that's the key to everything. Without, when I say workforce culture, here's the thing too. I want to make sure we understand. We're not just talking about nationality or particular affiliations that we have in our personal life. Think of the biggest cultural challenges we face day to day. I mean, even on this call, I guarantee you there are personnel security folks, there are counterintelligence folks, there are cybersecurity folks. Just among us three, we have cultures that differ greatly. But I will tell you, one of the biggest challenges I think we have is our culture differs greatly from human resources or acquisitions or the accountants in our organization. And the reality is sometimes I think that hurts us, and sometimes I think we're the culture that's probably the biggest challenge, because we want to catch bad people doing bad things, and that's really not the way to proactively preempt a human problem before it escalates. So our outreach this month, the publications we've got, the events that our partners from DoD and others are putting on, Social and Behavioral Science Summit that PersRec is sponsoring, that we've helped sponsor. There's a lot of things out there talking about workforce culture, how to basically harden your workforce, make your workforce have a sense of organizational citizenship and organizational justice, and kind of take your organization off the target deck, and eliminate, or at least mitigate, the vulnerabilities of the workforce that the adversaries exploit. Absolutely a key to us having any type of success and 90% solution as we move forward. The second thing I want to touch on is kind of where we're going within the NCSC. So I'm still the director of the National Insider Threat Task Force. My directorate is staffs the NITTF, but we've also looked at, we've also taken on, as I may have mentioned earlier, my directorate has taken on the lead for the National OPSEC program, which I think, it's a complementary of the history of our task force, and being able to work with the partners in a positive way and establish a national program with the least pain. The second thing is, I think, as I mentioned earlier, I think we're really excited about that OPSEC piece, giving us the opportunity to look at all sorts of mitigation practices to protect unclassified information. There's a lot of opportunities for us to leverage that as we work forward. We have also taken on the defensive counterintelligence mission for our federal partners within my directorate, based on the fact that we already have these working relationships with all the federal partners ourselves. It makes sense for us to have the common voice for this. The fourth thing we've taken on within the intelligence community, we are the lead for aggregating and analyzing unauthorized disclosures, which is a very good fit with the core NITTF mission of protecting classified. So that said, as we looked at all of this, we looked at, hey, let's go through the OPSEC exercise ourselves, and let's look at what we do. Let's look at the nation through the eyes of the enemy. And it's interesting what we saw as we really kind of did this look at this blended offensive capability that we face from the adversaries. And reality is there's very rarely do you see any type of blended defense against that blended offense. And I think from that, like a football perspective, our adversaries are coming at us with offensive coordinator, offensive coach, quarterbacks, articulated ability to call the audible, move the offense. We don't have that on the defense. Very rarely do we see an organization have the ability to say, okay, or I won't say have the ability, have the capability in place to say, okay, we're seeing, remote access cyber attacks relentlessly against this particular program. Well, who's sitting down with those folks and saying, okay, you are being targeted right now. And it's not just here, it's your LinkedIn. Don't be surprised if somebody's reaching out to you, think of it from the scientist's perspective. Like I mentioned, zero trust, great. You lock up all your research facilities cyber, but it doesn't lock up your researchers. So who's briefing them when they're seeing the cyber attacks coming? It's a no-brainer, and some folks really do it. But I think what we kind of came around and we looked at this is there's all these different threat mitigation pieces, but from a risk management framework perspective, you've got the risk, you've got the threat, the mitigation. We have these different pieces of mitigation, but we have an enterprise threat mitigation strategy or plan within an organization. I'm not saying that what we need to do is consolidate insider threat, counterintelligence, security, cybersecurity. Far from it. We each have our own pillars. We each have our own missions. There's reasons, specific reasons why counterintelligence needs to be separated from the rest of all of these. But we need to be coordinated. We need to be orchestrated in the way we defend. So that's the way forward for us. This is not a giving up on the insider threat mission. To the contrary, this is a maturity element of insider threat, is to play well in the sandbox with all the other threat mitigation practices. It's a maturity element on the cyber side. So the challenge for us going forward is, as a community, to be mature as a community on all defensive capabilities. So that's essentially the way forward, the way we see it. I would welcome any questions on any of that, any comments, any other topics you think that we should be looking at. So I look forward to the conversation.
Bob, thank you so much. So I have a whole bunch of questions, but we've got a number of questions in from the audience as well. And I want to combine kind of one of mine with one of theirs. And you mentioned culture and the culture of our workforces, and the fact that, you know, the human resources department is different than physical security, which is different than technology. And one of the things we found in our research for the white paper is that some organizations seem to think, you know, insider threat is a security thing or a IT thing, and really fail or don't fully realize that you need all those different cultures, and you need your legal resources and your HR resources and your security resources and your senior leadership as part of that that insider threat team and part of that program. And so what are your recommendations? And we got a question about this. What are your recommendations for breaking down those barriers and helping the communications across those different organizations and teams inside a particular organization when building a program?
Yeah, the no-brainer is that it's a leadership decision. It's a leadership issue from the top down. And, you know, the thing is, let's take it back to just a discussion of risk management. You know, the CEO, the president, the director, the secretary, they own the risk. So they own all risk. So they can delegate responsibility, and that's the art, is the delegation of the responsibility. But the leadership top down needs to understand that countering insider threat is a mission space. It is a strategic organizational goal for all of the stakeholders to play a part in. Insider threat programs themselves are just a small part of that. The good ones serve as an ambassador to the counter insider threat mission for all of the stakeholders, but they can only do so if the leadership from the top down supports it. So I think that's the key. I'd like to say I'd like to take credit for that, but I think, you know, one of the great minds in this business, Dr. Millick from DoD, we were kind of scratching our heads and figuring out how we we're going to tackle the DoD beast, and he just said, you know, we just have to consider this not just a program, it's a mission space. And we all went, wow, yeah, absolutely, it's a mission space. So it needs to be incorporated into the way the organization does business. It needs to be part of performance appraisals for senior leadership. It needs to be part of it needs to be part, and the collaboration among the programs needs to be part of those performance appraisals. It just needs to be built into the way the organization does business and driven as a culture.
No, absolutely makes sense. And definitely that was what we found, is that the most successful programs really have leadership drive, which, to your point, recognize it as a mission and a mission requirement. You mentioned that, and we got a question, you mentioned that part of the attack surface, or our adversaries, you know, are attacking us, and they're attacking us in the private sector to a large degree. Does the NITTF have a role, or what role do you have and play with helping private sector organizations protect themselves from, nation state, foreign, human attacks and insider threat type attacks?
That's a great question. In fact, actually, from the narrow definition of the NITTF, no, it's not really the role of the NITTF to specifically directly engage the private sector. However, our role is to help all of the federal partners. So for critical infrastructure, our role is to help Treasury with their outreach. And our role is to help agriculture with their outreach. So that was originally kind of the lanes we were in with the NITTF several years back. That said, now that we've taken on this broader role in parallel to the NITTF under the NCSE, we absolutely have a role to support the strategic goals of the National Counterintelligence Strategy, and that is absolutely helping the private sector defend themselves. So we've put out several guides. If you haven't seen them, we put out a Insider Threat for Critical Infrastructure guide about 4 or 5 months back, basically covering some of the points that I talked about, the greater threat that we see today, the challenges with the workforce, offering some broader, in fact, we even had a COVID discussion in that. We just put out a second guide for the food and agricultural industry about a month ago, and that was kind of answering kind of a demand that we saw coming out of our engagement with the FBI's WMD program. And that obviously it's a human problem, and the solution is going to be very similar across all sectors and all groups. So we're happy to play that role in continuing to advocate for a human solution. But it's definitely a space, bandwidth permitting, we're happy to be involved in, and events like this are we love that opportunity.
Did you break up a little, or maybe I broke up a little? Can you hear me okay?
I got you now. Yeah, I wasn't getting anything. I'm still missing you a little bit.
Okay. Hey, related to that, kind of a two-part question. What does your organization do, or how does your organization help facilitate information sharing among federal agencies, and then to include the federal civilian space? I know, and this probably is similar to the question around private industry, your charters around protecting classified networks and classified information, and some agencies don't have those, but do you still have a role or an opportunity, and what does that look like in supporting agencies that want to get started, particularly in the unclassified space, as you mentioned, which brings some additional, I think, challenges and confusion for agencies?
Great question. Great question. So little inside baseball for us. For what we've done for our directorate is we've kind of we've aligned ourselves more functionally. So rather than having like an assessments team or a tech team or a traditional model, we've got a governance and advocacy group that is out there to write paper. And when I say governance, and I think of soft policy, guidance, we need to publish. We need to find problems out there, which we have a research and analysis group now that is out there looking at the community. What are the trends? Where are we going? We've got the governance and advocacy that writes responses to these challenges and tries to find the solutions. But our meat and potatoes is we have a client engagement team that it used to be our liaison team of about 5 people. It's now about 9 or 10 folks. And we have client accounts for pretty much all the federal partners, and that certainly that we've identified, and we will highly encourage folks that do not have access to classified to step up and take advantage of that and build relationships. And these liaison officers are now kind of a one-stop shop for not just NITTF, but for the center as a whole. So they may be out dealing with agency X and ask them, hey, so what is your supply chain risk management look like within your organization? Do you need help? Because NCSE has these resources. Or how does your technical security look like? What are the challenges you're seeing there? Do you have a counterintelligence program, a defensive counterintelligence program? What do you need from that? So our client engagement folks really are trying to take a more expanded role in helping the federal partners. And again, trying to make sure that, okay, so you've got your program here, but this program over here, how can we help to bring even pieces of your organization together internally and help them talk with each other? So we are, I think we've doubled our efforts and doubled our resources in terms of engaging the non-DoD elements. I know DoD themselves has really stepped up through the Enterprise Performance Management Office and added additional resources, and our partners at DCSA are going gangbusters with the defense industrial base. So I think between us, we're really able to kind of double down. And I get, the other thing is I think we've also moved from a point where we're box checking and doing independent assessments of everybody. We're kind of past that point, and we don't have to bean count everybody anymore. And we can step back and say, okay, now you're up, now you're running. What do you need, and how can we help? And I'm really excited about the opportunity to be in that business now, rather than in kind of a compliance mode.
Yeah, and interesting. You kind of addressed this. We got a question about resources and about, do you have the resources you need, and how are you, doing with the resources you have? It sounds like you're doing some realignment. Maybe you've got some enhancements, but I want to add to that, if there's a way or an opportunity for you to help other agencies, in particular agencies that maybe haven't had to have programs and are looking to start them, but help them make the case for resources, because we all know inside the federal government, building something new usually has to get taken out of hide, and that's a challenge. And so being able to tell a compelling story is really important. It sounds like maybe your outreach teams can help organizations do that.
Yeah, and even on the governance and advocacy, and also through our partnerships with the other directorates within. One of the things NCSE has been doing, we took on kind of the outreach to handle that. They resource advocacy outside the IC. It's a new space for them. So down the road, we're looking at greater engagement with OMB. We want to get out and educate the authorizers and appropriators on the Hill. We want to do more outreach and educate the bill payers, so to speak, so that when the federal budgets are built and they go through the examiners, and that the examiners say, oh, this is important that they're asking for this, and that's well beyond the intelligence community. It's a lot of work to be done. I'm not here to say that we've solved this, cracked that nut overnight, but that's where we want to go, not just within within the task force, within our directorate, but within NCSE as a whole. So I do want to touch on the expanded resources. So two things to that. Yes, we've taken on additional resources. When we took on the different missions from the center, we took resources with them. So we're expanded in terms of our personnel. Our biggest challenge is finding seats to sit in at this point. But the second side of that
seats, that's where they're at.
Yeah, exactly. The second side of that is we're doing business as we've always done business, in leveraging the partnerships we have out there. So our partnerships with NARA ISU, we intend to expand our partnership with the CISO community. We want to expand. We can point to certain things. We can say it's a good idea to protect your controlled unclassified or expand your programs to the uncleared world. But NARA ISU can definitely tell you that. They own controlled unclassified information. NIST can definitely tell you, hey, and they do. Insider threat is a control within their frameworks. So the biggest thing is, we want to make sure that we're available to help, but we also welcome our partners out there that have the authorities that we do not, to step up and tell the community. And I think we will start to see more of that. And I think there's definitely interest on the Hill. There's definitely interest in the White House, not to expand our executive order, but to basically continue to tell the partners out there, hey, do what they're doing for classified. It's the right thing to do. So I think more will come, less out of our specific guidance, less out of our authorities, but more out of our partners stepping up and saying it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I would also, and you mentioned them, but I would add OMB with their federal information security authorities, and having being a former OMB guy, and we spent a little time looking at insider threat. So I think that's another place.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, even with the elevated, OSTP being elevated up in the White House,
in the cabinet,
Science and Technology Planning, they're aware, they're getting these threats, they're getting these challenges. So I think more will follow from OMB and the NSC and now an elevated OSTP. I think there's good thing to come. The other thing is, the flip side of it is, we've also said, you don't necessarily need to go out and build the massive hardcore program that we have for the protection of classified for your whole organization. Just things like the low-hanging fruit, awareness training, having a phone number that people can call. Do you need user activity monitoring to the full suite potential, or does UEBA, or what tools do you already have in place that can at least help to see some of that behavior in the virtual world? But there's a lot that can be done without saying every single minimum standard from EO13, from the Insider Threat Program for classified has to be applied to your whole organization. I think so. It's in a way, we may be better off not jumping in right now and saying, as of December 31st, you're going to have all of this capability for your whole organization. Baby steps might be the better way to go.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And we got a comment in the form, or a question in the form of a comment, and I agree with it. That is one of the things that those mandates, and I agree with you, having them kind of phase in over time, is it helps organizations, fight the internal resource fight, right? I used to tell federal CISOs, hey, I'm happy to give you a piece of paper you can go wave around to your CFO to help. I think we've got time for one more question. And you talked about resources, and you talked about expansion, you talked about talking with the Hill. Are there specific authorities that you think your organization needs, or do you think, from an authority standpoint, you're able to do the things you need to do in this space?
I'm comfortable with the authorities that we have, and I would be really, quite honestly, I don't want to grab anybody's territory. I want, I really want to be partners with the InfoSec world. I really want to be partners with NARA and NIST and CNSS. We ourselves do not need any more authorities, but I think there are additional authorities that our partners would probably benefit from. And I think there's additional requirements that the whole of government could benefit from. But I personally would not like to see that executed in saying, hey, NCSC, you have more authority for this. One, I think we still are the intelligence community at the core. Two, I think, the more you dump on any organization, the less likely they're going to be able to be good at their core mission space. I think we're very good at our core mission space. But I don't want to step into the cyber world or the InfoSec world. I think that is the space for the professionals in that business. And I think the relationships we build with each other is more important than authorities to mandate that we smack square pegs into a round hole.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Bob, again, I want to thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you for, putting on, I know your organization is really the driving force behind National Insider Threat Awareness Month. So thank you for that. Thank you for the time being with us this morning. And we certainly look forward to continuing the dialogue with you. So greatly appreciate.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your time. And I appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. So we now have a panel discussion, and I have the honor and the pleasure of getting to introduce our panelists. So let me ask our panelists to go ahead and come online now. I think they are all, I know they're all here with us. Great, great, great. And there we go, fantastic. So again, to our panelists, thank you very much for being here. Thank you for taking the time. Really looking forward to continuing this discussion and this dialogue around insider threat and insider threat programs. We've got with us today, we've got Leonard Bailey. Leonard Bailey is the head of the cybersecurity. I have to read yours explicitly, Leonard. The head of the cybersecurity unit, within the Department of Justice Criminal Division, inside the computer crime and intellectual property section. So Leonard does all things in this space, is really all you need to know, and on both cybersecurity and on insider threat. So we're thrilled to have Leonard here. We also have Jared Quantz. Jared is the insider threat program manager for the United States Coast Guard. Jared is a practitioner. He's been running programs for the Coast Guard program for years and really has deep insights into what a program needs, what the best practices are, and how to do things really well. We also have Dr. Margaret Cunningham. Margaret is a principal research scientist for ForcePoint. Margaret brings a different view, I think, to this, and really understanding, and Bob talked about, the human nature of this. And that is really something that Margaret focuses on, is the humans and how humans react and behave. And this really, at the end of the day, insider threats about human behavior and the ability to understand that. And then we've got John, JT Mendoza. JT is the Director of Global Security at CGI. Before joining CGI, JT spent a whole bunch of years inside the Department of Defense, and he was most recently the Deputy Director for the Air Force Insider Threat Hub. So hopefully we'll hear a little more about the Air Force Insider Threat Hub, but again, a practitioner in this space and really deep understanding. So panelists, thank you all for being with us today. Again, to our audience members, feel free to submit questions via the Q&A, and we will get to those. I want to start, Jared, with you. And as I mentioned, you run the Coast Guard Insider Threat Program, and what have you seen from that program? I'm sure you've seen it evolve over the years, but what do you think has been some of the most impactful elements of the Coast Guard program? And are there any particular cases that you want to talk about? We've probably, many people here have heard about the Hassan case. It's something that we reference in the paper, but is there something impactful that you'd like to kick us off with?
Well, I can certainly give it a shot. The Coast Guard's got sort of a large portfolio of interesting cases because we've been running for so long. But first, I want to say that I was absolutely mesmerized by that photo Bob had in the background of that llama. Absolutely love that, Bob, if you're still listening. And good morning to all of you, and good morning to Venable and my panelists as well. And thanks to you guys for organizing this and bringing us all together. I think one of the exciting things about this community is that you can be in the audience one day and be on a panel the next. I don't think we've figured out who all of our experts actually are, and I certainly don't feel like one, but I appreciate being asked to come up here and offer my 2 cents. So to your questions, sort of a two-part, right? First one I think is pretty quick and easy. The more impactful or important element of the Coast Guard program is user activity monitoring. I think anybody that's ever met us or has listened to me talk before at meetings or what have you, they would know that I stake a lot of our game on user activity monitoring data, really trying to squeeze that fruit for what it's worth. As for the most important use case for these programs, I mean, I think that's a little bit more complicated. The Manning WikiLeaks is sort of the original use case. I think that's still relevant. But beyond that, I can really only speak for the Coast Guard's experience and sort of reiterate some of the points that I've tried to make to other organizations trying to start programs. You brought up the Hassan case, and I think that's an expected response from me. But in my opinion, that's a low probability detection. The analytic tradecraft was really advanced. The threat actor type was sort of 1 in a million. And that's one of those cases that you want to be able to detect. But when I hear like use case, air quoting that, I think more about what you can or should expect to manifest as an insider threat and what your team should be capable of, sort of out of the box. I think that's a good use case. Something that you could describe that way would be a good use case. So I'd say for us, that would be a relatively unknown case that's essentially just lost to our archives, as a case like this would be. But years ago, we were asked to provide monitoring of and analytic support of an individual during his last month or so with the Coast Guard. He was considered a workplace violence risk and was being discharged from the military for conduct reasons. We didn't know anything really about him until we were brought in at this point. We hadn't matured to the position amongst our stakeholders where we were brought in immediately because there was a concern for this type of risk. So what they wanted from us was sort of exit monitoring, if you will. So we agreed after consulting with our lawyers on that. And on the morning that the subject was set to discharge, my analyst did what he normally did. He focused his UAM interface on that case. And as the data started populating, the analyst realized that the subject was burning a CD from our unclassed network. We decided we needed to see what was on that CD. It's the last morning. The guy's checking out. We need to know what he's burning. It's a sort of a common activity, but it's interesting to us. But unfortunately, we were only able to see file names. And anybody that uses UAM understands the issue of gathering too much data. So it was apparent to us that this was going to be a very large data transfer. So we decided to try to deploy a new policy on the fly, and it would be one that would actually get the files for us. And like I said, this is a large data transfer, so I think we thought we had a little bit of time. So within a handful of minutes, we were opening and assessing the files as they were hitting the disk, and we thought that was pretty neat. We hadn't seen that happen before. Turns out the capabilities there. And there turned out to be quite a bit of data in that burn that we couldn't let them leave with. Scores of PII, some high-res images of LE badges, some operational Coast Guard information. But ranked highest on our list was the PII. I mean, spreadsheet on spreadsheet of PII information. And tens, maybe upwards of 30 evals of personnel. So we're not letting him leave with this if we can prevent it. But we also know that we're behind him on the clock. So once we see all that, we call the CG Investigative Service because they're global and we're not. And we're not ground operators either. So we called CG Investigative Service in that area and gave them a really quick summary. Luckily, they had a great deal of experience working with us, and they hung the phone up and got to work. Right after the call, the CD burn completed, and CGIS was already moving to intercept. They gave us a call about half an hour later and let us know that they actually caught the guy in a stairwell on his way out of the building, retrieved the disk, gave the guy some parting advice, to put it kindly, and set him on his way. And it was after that I actually briefed my boss. And then after that, I actually called up and briefed the local command. But I think that was a really great success for us. And I think that's what you're capable of doing on day one with UAM.
Yeah, Jared, you mentioned UAM, and Margaret, I'd like to turn to you. UAM, user activity monitoring. One of the things that we found in our research is this is one of the, certainly can be one of the more controversial, if you will, aspects of insider threat, right? It feels intrusive to individuals that you're actually looking at what they're doing and monitoring. But is that a fair characterization? And can you talk a little bit about how a modern insider threat program, leverages UAM really as a key element of it?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for having me on this morning. It's really an honor to speak with this panel. So it's pretty understandable why people feel like it's intrusive if we just take a quick look at the words that we're using. We're using threat and monitoring, right? Immediately that puts people on the defensive. And these terms imply that user activity monitoring, or UAM, is entirely focused on finding the bad guy. And as Jared just pointed out, those really prominent instances of the bad guy that we know are low probability, and it doesn't happen very often. And so, as insider threat programs have matured, and as we've started to realize the need for interdisciplinary and cross-departmental engagement, we're also starting to understand how much more we can get out of these capabilities, including understanding when there's a leak or a loss that's accidental. And also, in some instances, the ability to identify a compromised account more quickly. And those aren't things that we usually think about when it comes to insider threat, but they are much more probable than the really bad, malicious actor. And, we have some work to do in changing how we talk about this. We have some work to do on the terms that we're using. And from what I know, working in this little pocket of interest is that there are some efforts to do that.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you that one of the things that, most of the practitioners we talked with said this is really about how do you identify that behavior early on, right? How do you rudder correct someone to kind of keep them being a productive part of the organization, as opposed to, eventually they sort of slip into that being a bad case. I think it's rare that they start off as just completely malicious and head in that direction.
Grant, you used one more word that gets people on edge, and it's productive. And I'm just going to say, because a lot of people do have concerns that their organization is using UAM because they're tracking their productivity. And, I understand that because some organizations might actually do so. However, I think that, if you implement this type of capability well, you have built-in protections and purpose for why you're doing what you're doing that can be provided to your workforce in a transparent way to build that sense of trust that's very critical for a successful deployment.
Absolutely. Great point. It was not the use of the word productive that I was intending there. However, great point.
Speaking on words.
Absolutely. They matter a lot, as we say. And I think in this space, they matter an extra lot. Leonard, I want to turn to you. And can you talk a little bit about, what do you see as some of the kind of unexpected benefits of these programs from the Justice Department's point of view?
Sure, Grant. And again, thank you for the invitation to come and speak on this topic. This may kind of surprise you coming from, a knuckle-dragging prosecutor, but one of the benefits that I think flows from these programs has less to do with UAM and more to do with the more expansive program and the outcomes you can achieve. What I mean by that is when you talk about an insider threat program, that's a suite of activities. UAM is part of that. You've got your technological side with the telemetry and analytics and your ability to crunch that information. And then you've got your non-technical side where you've got people who are engaging with others and assessing how people are behaving in the workplace. And in fact, I'd submit that one of the best deterrents to an insider threat problem is just good management, a healthy workplace. But the thing I think, talking to people who are running these programs, I've noticed is that one of the benefits of these programs is not that you're catching more bad guys, but you're finding more employees in distress. That is, it's an opportunity to identify often employees who are having problems, alcohol, gambling, things of that nature that could manifest later as more significant problems and the things that the bad guys do, or an opportunity to, for example, radicalize someone or to, somehow otherwise compromise them and use them as an insider threat. But the ability to detect this activity provides the employer with an opportunity to intervene. And that's something that can actually, be part of the whole suite of efforts. If you think about insider threat as being the effort to first identify the threat, to prevent it, and to respond. And to the extent that we're able to prevent before there's a response that's necessary, that's sort of a win. So that's one benefit I'd flag. Rather than simply catching the bad guy, it's the ability to use other tools to intervene and perhaps prevent the problem from becoming more significant.
No, that absolutely makes sense. And actually, Margaret, I want to turn back to you for a minute and just see if I can get your kind of reaction to that and your thoughts on Leonard's, and then JT, I'll get to you with a question here in a moment.
Yeah, sure. I mean, trying to understand people using data collected with technology is a challenge. That is part of what Leonard said. It isn't just about UAM and that's it. That's the bucket. This is how you do it, right? It does take an understanding of people, your organization, the health of your organization. And then also, if you do detect some sort of issue, maybe it's gambling or alcoholism or whatever is going on, building out a strategy for addressing that in a way that doesn't create a bigger problem. And I think that's sometimes the long lost factor that we don't really get to, and it's critical. So early detection, understanding people, and then trying to help them in a way that retains your workforce and also supports people in what they're going through. And I think that, in this really difficult and stressful time right now, we will be facing a lot of those types of challenges.
Yeah, and I think Bob touched on that, right? I mean, all the stresses that individuals in our workforce are under and experiencing, both professionally and personally, and then societally as well. So thank you very much. Thanks, Leonard. JT, I want to touch on, you've spent a lot of time in the government. Now you're in private industry as the director of global security. Can you talk a little bit about the differences you've seen and how the public and private sector, approach this topic, the topic of insider threat, and also, what you think can be done inside the public sector to really help drive these programs forward? Any recommendations you have there?
Yeah, thank you, Grant, again for having me this morning as well. I also want to kind of touch on what Leonard and Margaret were saying, because I think oftentimes it's an aspect that is lost, right? What Leonard was speaking about was the organization's response to incidents, right? And I think that's something, I guess, answering the second half of your question first, it's something that we can apply regardless of whether it's private sector or public sector type of organization. It's what is the organizational responses to when these incidents happen? And oftentimes we talk about things like naming conventions and what we're going. Bob kind of touched on this a little bit, but is it insider threat or insider risk, or is it called something else? And while words do matter, right, and words are critical, especially in this space, I think one of the things that I have seen from my experience is words matter, but if there's no philosophy and actually substance behind them, then you're lost, right? So I've seen organizations say, well, our program is called Insider Risk because we're focused on the risk, but the philosophy doesn't match. There's still sort of right of boom, if you will, when risk starts to show up, and their organizational response is maybe postured wrong. And so, what I want to sort of emphasize, I guess, is this, in my opinion, the way I've approached this, having spent time at not only at DIA and with the Air Force and now at CGI, our philosophy is really in managing risk. Bob talked a little bit about, countering the threat. We've taken a slightly different approach based on my experience in the department and with the US government. I believe we all bring risk to the table, right? We all sort of carry baggage, if you will, that we bring in to different organizations. And the program's responsibility, in my opinion, at least at CGI, is to try to manage that risk with the cross-functional partners, right? So I think what I would say to answer your question probably, more directly is, for me, I've been able to take the sort of the foundations of programmatics that I've experienced throughout my career and bring them to CGI. We're an international company that's not we're not directed by executive order or any type or the NISPOM, right? My program is responsible for 80,000 employees in over 40 countries. So I have to deal with GDPR and different types of privacy regulations across the world. And so what I would say is that similar to the government, though, to your point is, and I think Jared or Margaret may have mentioned this, awareness becomes very critical, right? Not only with senior executives, but all the way down to every individual employee. Every individual employee has to understand what the program is about. So just being transparent from that perspective.
Yeah, I think that employee transparency is really, really important. And that was one of the things we found in the research is, that is absolutely a key element, right? That senior level buy-in and really being driven from the top down that Bob talked about, but being understood throughout the organization. I guess maybe open to anyone on the panel, or maybe I'll start with you, Margaret, but does anyone have additional thoughts on kind of, recommendations or how we can help ensure that the workforce understands, the boundaries of the program and what to do? I mean, we want them to understand it in a way that, no one can maliciously game it, if you will, but we want them to understand that it's there as an organizational tool, not as a big brother.
Yeah, I think unfortunately people are always going to game the system. Whether you give them the details or not, they're going to figure that out and they're going to find a way to do what they want to do. It's the nature of people. But that said, to provide transparency, I think back to what JT said, you have to have congruence between what your program says they're about and what they're really about. So first you have to get it straight within the team that's building out the program and make sure that there's a consensus across the other contributing groups in your organization. You can't explain or provide transparency to your workforce without understanding what you're doing. And, you've got to know what tools you're using, whether it's UAM or something else, and why you're doing it. So if it is just for specific use cases, okay. If it's for something else, okay. You start where you start. But it's critical that people understand when they open up their computer and it says you're being monitored. What does that mean, right? Does that mean everything? Does that mean my personal life? Is that my professional life only? Is it, if I log into my personal bank account, but on this computer, help people understand what it really means and what is fair game and what's not. And I think that goes a long way in telling people exactly what we're looking at, right? And then it's pretty much your choice. If you understand what's being collected, then it's your choice what you do with your tools that are being monitored, right? Easier said than done, but I think that's one way forward.
Could I add something to that?
Yeah, please do.
I think some of that sort of socializing what the program is should be seamless and organic to the program for this reason. So in my day job, I'm a lawyer, right? And my office's interest in UAM sort of started with the notion that there were communications that were being intercepted or collected. And there are a suite of federal laws that regulate when you can and can't do that. And now there are also privacy laws layered on top of that. So you have the Wiretap Act, the Pen Trap Statute. If you're at a government agency, you have to deal with the Fourth Amendment potentially as well. And the one through line that allows all of that to be done legally is notification and consent, right? So in the course of getting notification and consent, you have things like a logon banner or workplace policy, training that educates the employee on what's happening. And as part of that, you would hope there'd be some integration of the program into that training to obtain the consent you need to run the program, to intercept the communications. Obviously, there's a little bit of a dance around operational security and making sure that you're able to do what you need to do to identify bad conduct. But the hallmark of all of this is a structure in which you do it with consent and notice. And so you should get some of that through some of the education about what's happening through that.
Yeah, no, that is a great point. And being someone that spent most of my career checking that, yes, I agree, box and providing you the consent. I guess I want to ask though, Jared or JT, how do you see that in practice? Kind of in addition to the consent piece, but how have you seen programs really, outreach? And maybe it's not from the Insider Threat program, maybe it's from the HR department or some other kind of team member, but how have you seen people communicate with and work with the workforce to make sure they understand, as Margaret was talking about, the bounds of the program?
So at the Coast Guard, we have a team of coordinators, as we call them, that we've had in place probably since 2010. And their job is specifically to go out and interface with the men and women of the Coast Guard and explain to them who we are and what we do and why we're here and how we're here to help. They really do try and steer away from appearing like they're marketing. What we want for them is for them to tell the real story of what we're doing and how that can help them, without trying to dress it up with language that makes it sort of distant and seemingly like just another government apparatus. Beyond that, we sort of, at least in the way that we've designed our program, the Insider Threat program sort of stays behind the scenes and is somewhat invisible, like an antivirus program to the that's odd to say, but anyway, it's sort of invisible to the workforce. They have the ability to communicate with us through a variety of different mechanisms. They can send us emails through our tip line. They can call us over our number, so on and so forth. But our main focus for communicating and interacting with the workforce is more through our stakeholders. So I don't think it's been the case to date that any given Coast Guard employee has received a notification that the Insider Threat program has called them a bad person, or has said that, hey, we have caught you doing this naughty, this inappropriate behavior thing. We pass that information to other folks who are there, who have long since had these requirements to deal with these behavioral issues, be it the counterintelligence service, law enforcement, personnel security, so on and so forth, or commanding officers, a cadre of folks in the military that you absolutely cannot overlook, because part of their professional development is the growth of individuals professionally and personally. And they're an outstanding resource for their authorities, but also because they're the action arm for most of this low hanging fruit sort of behaviors that we try to correct. So we don't advertise as much, but we do go out and train and talk and explain to them that we're here to help as best we can. But more often than not, we're represented by our stakeholders in sort of a team fashion.
Now that makes a lot of sense. And I mean, you mentioned commanding officers, leadership managers. I think that is really, really a critical element, of an Insider Threat or really any program. And that's why I think the human resources team is an important member of the team, to be able to help supervisors explain all the different things that they have to be able to explain to the workforce. JT, did you want to jump in there?
I just wanted to add in, I've seen it done in a variety of ways, obviously, but I think one of the things that helps to that would help to maybe highlight an important aspect of building a program like this is that, the different organizations that I've been a part of, the Insider Threat program did, training and awareness that met the culture of the organization. Right. And so Bob talked a little bit about that, right? Organizational culture. And so when I was a part of DIA, our program had a slightly different approach than the way we approached it in the Air Force, right? I think we've definitely in both of those programs, and even here at CGI, we have tried to integrate meeting those insider threat, insider risk training requirements into stakeholder training requirements, right? So if it's ethics related or IG related or personnel security related, we've definitely tried to put the onus, maybe more the responsibility on those critical stakeholders. The one thing I would say too that kind of goes back to something Margaret said is, you know, when the way we've approached training in the programs I've been a part of is we've also tried to make it, not only are we trying to educate the employee base, right, to what the program is about, but then also make them aware of what their responsibilities are in the program. So make, you know, one of the things we've tried to do is, and I think someone coined this when we were at DIA, but we tried to make a sensor out of every employee. So educate them to the point where they're a force multiplier for your program, and they know enough about the program that they realize this isn't that really what the program is at its core and what it should be used for.
Yeah, JT, we actually got a question from the audience on that that was around how do you increase quotes crowdsourcing amongst organization employees? Do you have periodic education sessions? But I think that really gets to your point of how do you have everyone feel that they're a part of this, as opposed to, you know, unfortunately, some may feel they're a victim of it, or you know, in some way, shape, or form, and we certainly don't want them to feel that.
I mean, we did survey. Sorry, I just want to.
No, go ahead.
When we were at DIA, we did surveys of you know, number of employees that were willing to participate. One of the things that I think has been probably one of the most effective efforts in this space has been what Doug Thomas did at Lockheed Martin when he first got there, and he brought together focus groups. They brought a third party in to do focus groups. And something that came out of that, which I've tried to implement in every program I've been a part of, is they actually got rid of terms like, you know, we keep saying words matter, right? They got rid of terms like report. And I can't remember the other term right now, but so basically employees were asked to engage security or share your concerns with security. It was no longer, hey, report these things to security, right? So in our culture, I'm sure Margaret could speak more to this than I can, but, you know, in our culture of growing up with don't tattletale and don't, you know, that's, and now we work in an industry where we're told, hey, you gotta tell on your coworkers, you gotta tell on yourself. Well, it kind of goes against really, you know, our DNA really. So I just want to throw that in there.
Well, JT, I don't know why you didn't take the opportunity to say snitches get stitches, but I totally hear you, right? So if you take a look at, first of all, I come from a human factors and human systems integration background, and I've worked in healthcare, you know, I've worked on physical security, and, you know, some of these other types of organizations, especially aviation, for instance, have a dedication to just culture, right? And so we keep talking about culture, we're talking about sharing information, and that's something that is not just passively going to happen, right? Like we have to give people the opportunity and the intrinsic motivation to share because they're getting a benefit from it. So, you know, we have to be engaging in that way. So there are near miss reporting. There is involving multiple people in root cause analysis for various types of incidents. And, you know, I do think that we're moving in that direction in the field of cybersecurity in general, but also in insider threat. But it is very much a push towards, you know, coming at this as a problem set that requires kind of everyone. And, you know, that's, get on board, right? You can tell one person to do something and they do it and the other person does the opposite. So dealing with that response from your workforce and from people to what we're asking them to do is, it's a really fun problem, I'll say, because I like hard problems.
It is definitely a hard problem. I think all people problems are challenging because all, as you pointed out, all people are different. I want to touch on, you know, we've spent the last year and a half or more now, working from home. For many organizations, that's been a big shift. We were, Bob mentioned earlier, certainly for the intelligence community, a very big shift. But for a lot of government organizations and private organizations, it's been a significant change. And so I want to open it up to anyone of how have you seen insider threat programs, or how would you recommend that they change in a reaction to this changing dynamic and the changing environment that we've experienced? I'll pause and then just call on someone. Okay, Jared.
I felt that coming. That's sort of a weird question. So let me characterize this right. I was hanging on your words, but yeah. So how would I suggest people change their insider threat program relative to the new world we're sort of living in? And then what have we seen, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So any change that I would have advice for would be if it comes from me, it's going to come from data. Like that's my decisions are typically driven by data, when and where they can be. Other than that, it's always a crapshoot and measure after. So I would start with sort of what we've seen since people have gone into quarantine and we've been dealing with this COVID issue and we've increased telework, and now we're seeing that manifest as sort of a permanent or more of a mainstay technique for, I don't know, employing people. So what our surface looks like now from an insider threat perspective, we are getting probably half of the requests in to support cases that we normally would otherwise get in, be that from from law enforcement investigations, command and officer investigations, counterintelligence operation investigations, personnel security issues, et cetera. The only thing that really hasn't slowed down is continuous evaluation data checks. That's just been this ongoing cycle, and I don't think that does change. So everything has gone down tremendously, including the amount of things that we have detected. That's gone down. The total amount of data that we are gathering has also gone down. But one thing's gone up, and I don't expect it to stay there. This, I think, is just I think this is just part and parcel with transitioning to telework, but the failure to protect controlled unclassified information has gone up. That's a thing that we have a particularly focused way of detecting, and we monitor and measure that, and that's seen a dramatic increase. We report on that because we just want to see that sort of information protected the way the government says that it wants it. I do expect that to curtail a bit. But that's been the change. So with that being the change, honestly, if it's going to stay this way, that we have less data and less stuff to deal with, then my only real change for the insider threat program will be to refocus some of the personnel that are working on day-to-day detection duties and focus them on larger theoretical projects that help design new techniques for evaluating temporal data out of our, say, database. Right. So doing more interesting things with the data that we already have instead of going out hunting for more data or spending time contemplating perhaps what the next threats are.
Interesting. Go ahead, Leonard.
Oh, I was going to toss in something also. This is someplace where I think kind of insider threat and cybersecurity cross. One of the more vexing issues, policy and legal, there is bring your own device policies, right? Exactly what is fair game for monitoring to protect against threats when someone is using their own device and has permission to do so. I think this has got to be a manifestation of that as well, because in fact, unless your office is issuing a laptop, many are, but some of them aren't. You are doing work on an enclave that's personal. In your home, along with, commingled with government work. And I think this goes to Jared's point about, the perhaps failure to control sort of sensitive unclassified information. That there I think are some difficult questions that are going to have to be dealt with there if we stay in this posture for a long time. And I think a lot of workplaces are thinking about greater flexibility around this.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And I know we've worked with clients and private sector clients that are just trying to figure out what policies they need around bring your own device. So JT, I think you were about to jump in there though.
Yeah, I was just going to say, for us, because we've got such a diverse workforce internationally, one of the things that we've done is we have done some tailored things across those strategic business units, but primarily what we've done is we've engaged with HR and our leadership academy to try to get leaders more engaged, right? So we talk about this being a human problem. There's some things technically that we do, and there's some things technically that I'm unable to do based on privacy regulations in certain countries. So one of the approaches we've taken is, how do we get managers more engaged? How do we get actual genuine leadership where leaders are concerned about their teammates, and so they can be sort of at that the tipping point of detecting potential behavioral indicators for us.
No, really good point. Really good point. So I want to shift a little bit. I want to ask, and this came up in Bob's conversation around policy and around what policies are out there and perhaps what policies we need in this space. Leonard, I want to start with you on kind of thoughts for the unclassified space, and maybe we'll limit it to the unclassified, not BYOD piece, but the unclassified space, that an organization owns. We know there aren't mandates there, but any thoughts on what maybe we should do or could do in that space?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you're dealing with an unclassified space, you have just increased the aperture tremendously. The type of activity that you would be monitoring on a classified system versus what you possibly be able to gather on an unclassified system is just grown much more immense. I mean, accessing your webmail at work, for example, would possibly render all of that visible to someone. Social media feeds, all that would suddenly come into play. And I think that just compounds the importance of sort of good deliberate policies and documentation. Again, lawyer, I think in terms of the worst case and the eventual need to defend yourself, either because there's been a suit or because your boss has been called, to sit at a green table in front of a congressional hearing because there's something that's supposedly untoward. And what you can't have, I'd submit, is when someone asks, why was this information collected? The answer can't be, we thought it would be helpful, right? Do you have the tooling and do you have the resources to actually put against that, to have actually used it? And you're going to have to be able to sort of defend that. Similarly, and I'm sure Jared and JT could speak volumes on this, but having good, solid criteria by which you're making these decisions, you can't have someone essentially the target of monitoring because, well, they look hinky, right? Or they're engaged in conduct that you thought was, and once you move into an unclassified form, you really are accessing much more information that people would say are just part of everyone's conventional normal life. Lastly, as a legal matter, your expectation of privacy with your government agency when you're on a classified system is vastly diminished, right? Now, you could argue that you have a limited expectation of privacy on a government system, but that gets very complicated very quickly with contractors who have maybe different understandings about how they operate, or particularly with DoD, where you have people who use a network openly for personal reasons because they're stationed somewhere and that's the way the network works. The sort of commingling of purposes becomes very complicated. So I think there's complexities that have to be sorted through. I'm not saying it can't be done at all. In fact, I think it is being done and can be done very intelligently, but you have to just watch for these third rails.
Great. So we've only got a couple minutes left. I'm going to ask everyone in maybe less than a minute if you can give one piece of advice to an organization that's just starting a program in the unclassified space. So what is the one best practice that you'd like to leave them with? And I'm going to go JT to you, and then Jared, I'll go to you.
Oh man, I would say and it kind of dovetails on what Leonard just said, I think I would just have sound guiding principles, right? Have sound guiding principles. Where are you trying to go? What is the desired end state? Why are you trying to get there? What is the purpose of getting there? And then just have sound guiding principles around that. Like Leonard said, sort of guardrails that keep you from going off the rail.
Jared?
I have two things. Even though this is going to be an unclassified system, I'm going to give you one as a classified resource. So first, I would draft an extremely articulate ethos, and I would stick to it, and I would think it through very, very well. And second, I would get on SIPRNet and download the U.S. Army's STAP, their after action report from their initial audit program pilot. And I would keep that under my left arm.
Margaret?
So I'm a measurement person. I love it. I would say have a plan, but start small and don't be afraid to start small. Make sure that you're measuring outcomes and understanding why you implemented something and what you got out of it so that you can show that it's made a difference. And that actually helps a lot in different types of buy-in, and it can also help people in your workforce understand what you're going for. But I would definitely say don't be afraid to not do it all at once. I think we can get mired in that and not make any movement because it seems like too big of a problem.
Perfect. And Leonard, the last word for our lawyer.
Oh, well, this is probably obvious, but there's no need to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of really good guidance out there already. And you can avoid some mistakes by making sure that you go to places, I think SEI and CERT, that there are materials out in the world that you can use as a good guide to stand up your program.
Fantastic. Well, again, panelists, I want to thank all of you for your time. Really appreciate the conversation. I think this was super helpful and super useful. And again, for the audience, as I mentioned, we've got a white paper on this topic that we'll be sending out to everyone. I want to thank Venable for hosting. I realize I didn't actually introduce myself. Grant Schneider, Senior Director for Cybersecurity Policy at Venable, and a whole bunch of years inside the government and DoD and the intelligence community, and as I mentioned earlier, consenting to a lot of these types of programs and being the subject of. Again, really appreciate the dialogue today. Thank you, Bob, for your participation and the work that you and that all of our panelists are doing really on a daily basis, but also taking the time to share that with us. So thank you all very much, and hope everyone has a great afternoon.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Thanks so much.